Hello and welcome to today's SANS Institute webcast, Skilling the Gap, Creative Ways to Recruit Top Cyber Talent. This is the first of a series of 5 of HR plus cybersecurity talent hosted by Kevin Garvey, who is an associate instructor for the SANS Institute. Kevin, welcome with us. And let me just tell attendees, if you have questions for Kevin, please post them in the Q&A and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to go into that gap that we see within the cybersecurity industry today. And it's been a gap for quite a while, but it really hasn't been solved yet. And there's been a lot of initiatives to help solving this gap, but there's still so much work to be done. So I'm going to go into some things that I've done from my vantage point, and I'm going to introduce myself and go into how you might be able to have some things that you could take back to your office to help you with your organization's cybersecurity skill gap. And when I look at some of these headlines that I see on the news, they are worrisome and they're also frightening. When we look at the cyber gap within cybersecurity right now, there is a large amount of jobs that really still sit unfilled throughout the entire world. There was a great New York Times article a few years back that stated that cybersecurity talent crunch could create 3.5 million unfilled jobs by 2021. And here we are in 2021, that problem still exists. And I can attest to that because I'm still looking for some great talent to join not only my organization, but then also talking to other folks who are looking for talent. I know that that talent pipeline is still a bit of a concern. But this is not just something that happens in the United States or in just one country either. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, they went out to many different government organizations all around the world. And I was just flabbergasted by this comment that 1 in 4 say that an insufficient cybersecurity staff had damaged their organization's reputation or directly led to a loss of property through a cyber attack. Just pause there and think about how damaging that is to an organization, that they don't have the confidence in even the staff that we have, let alone the staff that we're trying to hire, in order to protect the organization and to protect the organization from not only external threats, but also internal threats as well. And these headlines are all over, no matter what year we're in and no matter what country you're looking at. It is a problem. However, with the problem always comes a solution, right? And we within the organization and also within the industry are really trying hard to chisel away at this cybersecurity gap. And there's been a lot of creative ways in order to make sure that we can put not only our organization, but our cybersecurity initiatives be a top priority for the organization and also for the country as well. You take a step back and you think about why some of those numbers are so high. There's a variety of reasons, but I wanted to hone in on 4 in particular. One is that stepping stone, that hands-on experience that many people just don't have, it's hard to come by in order to really get into the cybersecurity world. And I think back to an individual I was talking to only a few months back who was trying to make that next step into the cybersecurity field. And this individual, well, they read all the job descriptions. They were able to understand some of the themes of a cybersecurity expert and how to become successful, but they didn't know some of the underlying technologies behind it. And we're going to go into some examples of not only that, but maybe some ways to get past that within your organization as well. And now all of us have had that opportunity to either look or read or write job descriptions for cybersecurity roles. And the job descriptions many of times can scare off really great candidates. We might already be taking away some of our candidates before we even get to the interview stage. And we're going to go into examples of that along the way too. Some of the interviews could be just a little scary for some of the folks who are trying to get into cybersecurity as well. We're going to go into some techniques that you can bring back to your organization to really find out who the true talent, what the true talent is, and how they can help you within that organization, even without some of the rote technical experience. And it's a really good opportunity for the tech teams and then also for the HR teams to start working together. And it really increases our opportunity to find that best candidate for the role. And we don't have a lot of opportunities within IT, and especially within cybersecurity, to have such a great communication between HR or other areas within an organization. And what I always loved about trying to really find a good candidate for a role is that I had to work really hard with the HR folks. And the HR folks in the organizations that I've been at have also been able to work with me. And it's been a great collaboration along the way. So I'm going to go into some items that might help, whether it's the cybersecurity folks or the HR folks, to really work together to really try to solve that gap for your organization. But before we go into all of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I'm even talking to you about it today. So my name is Kevin Garvey. I'm an IT security manager with a little bit of a focus on the operational side of the house. I also teach Management 512, which is the Security Essentials for Manager course. And what I love about Management 512 is we get a huge subset of folks that come into our classes. And some of the folks that take the class, they could be very technical and they want to understand how to become a little bit more of a leader within their organization. We have some individuals, and I notice this a lot, they'll come in from a project management standpoint, and they have cybersecurity projects that they're in charge of, but they want to understand a little bit more about cybersecurity. And then we have other folks that join that are just learning about cybersecurity. In fact, I think back to one class I was in, well, the student was put in charge of leading a cybersecurity program. But where did they come from? They didn't come from IT. They didn't come from another cybersecurity job. They actually came from a marketing group. And I loved having a conversation with this person because I got to understand what the rationale was of that organization to put this person into a cybersecurity role. And I took a few things from that. One, not only is it a great challenge for so many people, but it's also a great challenge that's open to an enormous amount of people within the world and in the country as well. So my experience is in finance and media in the utility sector. So I've had that opportunity of being not only an individual contributor, but then also being a lead, a manager for cybersecurity operations and also engineering as well. What comes with managing? Well, you have to interview people. And I've interviewed hundreds of folks for many open roles that we've had within the organizations that I've been a part of. And I have taken a lot of lessons learned from many of those interviews. So I'm going to go through some of them, especially over the course of today and over the series of the webinars as well. Because of course, I want to make sure that somebody who comes into the organization feels comfortable with the role. And I want to make sure that they feel comfortable with the skills that they bring to the table, even if sometimes those skills may not be that technical skill set that we would be looking for, fit 100% of the skills that we have on the resume. I've also had a great opportunity of volunteering with organizations and also working with SANS as well to start building up the cybersecurity community. And I've had a lot of fun working with a few organizations that are at the college level and then other levels outside of the college level to build up not only the skill set, but then also the confidence of people who want to be part of the cybersecurity industry. And I've gotten to know a lot of people who have really flourished under some of the mentorship of some of these programs. And really all they needed was someone to showcase to them, hey, you can get into this industry. You can be successful in this industry. Here are maybe one or two different ways that you can do it. And when I take a step back and think about that, then it becomes incumbent on myself as a manager, and then also the folks that I work with in the HR departments to also bring out that success factor for many of the candidates that we have that apply for the role. I'm a finance major. How did I become a cybersecurity guy? Well, I graduated back in 2008. And when I graduated in 2008, at the time, it was one of the really big events that sort of stopped us from getting back into the finance realm. And I loved tinkering with computers. And in fact, I worked at the help desk at my local university when I was still going to school. And that allowed me to get much more into the weeds with IT and especially with infrastructure in general. While cybersecurity was still it was a thing, it wasn't something that had a very particular job description, or at least it wasn't as commonplace as it is now. And then I started working as a systems administrator. But one thing I took from the help desk role is when we had some students walk in, they would showcase to us that they had a virus on their computer. And many of my coworkers that I worked with at the time, and there's nothing wrong with it. They wanted to make sure that that customer was happy, and they wanted to make sure that customer would walk out satisfied. So how do you do that? Well, if somebody has a virus and they take in their computer to a help desk, they want it fixed and they want it fixed quickly. But I bring this up because I found myself really wanting to, well, keep the laptop close by, and I wanted to see what was going on with the laptop. How did they get the virus on the computer? What was the behavior of the virus? What was this virus trying to do? What was its end goal? Now, that really didn't make for some happy customers along the way, but I did get an opportunity to really sort of hone in on the fact that I do enjoy problem solving. And I enjoy also looking to see why something happened, and then also what we can do to make things better along the way. And that got my mind going into how much I very much enjoyed cybersecurity. Fast forward a little bit, once it became a little bit more of an established industry, I knew I really wanted to be a part of that industry. But I also hit barriers. I was in the help desk, I was a system admin. And when I applied for cybersecurity roles, nobody wanted to talk to me. Not surprising, right? I didn't have that cybersecurity expertise, or at least what they were thinking was cybersecurity expertise. So I thought about some ways that I could really get into the industry without actually having any experience in the industry. One of the beauties of working for an educational facility is that education is a top priority. And at the school that I was at, that I was working as a system admin for, I wanted to become a little bit more curious. So I knocked on the door of the network admin. I knocked on the door of the Windows administration group. And I said, hey, I know I have a little bit of downtime at my help desk and system admin job right now. Do you mind if I sit next to you and help work through some problems with you? How about if I have a virus, or if there's a virus that comes into the help desk, that we could work on it together, and maybe, hey, maybe we could utilize the network tools that we have to go understand what the traffic patterns are. And again, this was all curiosity. This wasn't part of the job description. This wasn't something that was required of my help desk or system admin role, but I wanted to utilize some of the expertise that was in the organization already. And it's something that I have admired for other people to do as well. In fact, I've interviewed a few folks who have had a little bit of a problem trying to get some of that cybersecurity expertise. And one way they were able to get past it is to buy somebody a cup of coffee when we were sitting in the office, and being able to sit next to that person to understand a little bit more about some of their technologies. I also started networking as well. I started looking at different organizations that were just starting to flourish. And we're going to get into some examples of those organizations a little bit later on. And also, we're going to be giving out a bit of a paper of all of those organizations too. But I wanted to get involved. And one of the great things that I found out is I didn't need to be a cybersecurity superstar in order to join some of these organizations. You can go to a meeting, you can read the book, you can read whatever you want, and you don't have to be a member of many of these organizations to do so. And I started thinking about how to become that cybersecurity expert, that subject matter expert that many of these jobs were calling for. And then finally, training. And I think back to training a little bit. Many folks have brought this up with me in the past. You think about the CISSP, which is an industry standard cybersecurity certification. It requires experience, right? But what I tell many folks who are trying to get into the industry is learning about what is on the CISSP, or learning about other items that are part of a certification that require you to have some experience. You might be able to do that training on your own without taking the certification. And what's great about it is you can showcase that during an interview as well. And especially as you start building yourself up within the industry. So the barriers to entry, while they're very high, sometimes they could be a little bit lowered as well. And that was what helped me throughout the journey. Now, when I was looking through this presentation and I wanted to bring up a sample job description, all I did was I went over to our favorite search engines and I said, hey, I need a job description for a cybersecurity analyst. And I looked at the first job description that came up. It was a PhD role for a cybersecurity analyst role. And I said to myself, this is exactly why I want to do this webinar, because the barrier to entry looks so incredibly high on some job descriptions. And here's just a sample job description that's fairly commonplace throughout a lot of organizations, and especially around the world as well. There is a minimum of 3 years of experience. And again, this is a sample job description. There's also cybersecurity related certifications. And as you can tell, I go over some of them here, the CISSP, CISM, CISA, and then some other SANS certifications as well. But when we look at it from the eyes of the applicant, this can totally scare a lot of people away. Many people don't have these certifications. They might not have had the time. They might not have had the expertise in order to take them. So we lose the opportunity as cybersecurity managers and HR folks to really bring them in and to start interviewing them along the way. And then, of course, for those who have seen many other job descriptions, you'll start seeing that there are other technologies that are peppered into the job description as well. Well, it would be nice if you had 10 years of networking, or hey, it would be nice if you had some database experience. Well, this is like finding a unicorn. And I've noticed that whenever I start looking at job descriptions, is I really want to hone in on exactly what I'm looking for out of this job. And many times it's the thought process that I want on the team. It's somebody who might not understand every single piece of technology, but could think like a cybersecurity analyst along the way. And I've started redoing many of my job descriptions to really showcase that as well. What I've noticed is that people, they will be able to learn many of the technical requirements of a role, but being able to teach that problem solving skill, or actually bringing in somebody who understands really how to dive deep into a problem, can be a lot harder. And sometimes these job descriptions, they end up taking a lot of great candidates out of the way. So something to think about. And there's also some things that we can do to really make this a little bit stronger too. And I talked a little bit about the fact that it's entry level. Well, entry level, and I remember this when I was in college, I would look at an entry level role, whether it was, well, at the time when I was looking at finance roles and also looking at IT roles, an entry level role required a minimum of 3 years of experience. You sit there, you're scratching your head. How am I supposed to get 3 years of experience if I don't have the time to actually put in 3 years of experience? And that still is a bit of a problem today. And we're going to go into some things that I have actually gone through and forward with in some of my roles to start building up that experience, especially for the entry level employees, the entry level folks who are just coming out of a degree program. And I talked a little bit about certifications, but sometimes the certifications don't align with the role. We talk about a cybersecurity analyst. I can tell you a lot of times what happens, especially on the management side, and maybe on other fronts as well. We need a description, just like what I did for the previous slide. And you know what we do to get that description? We go to our favorite search engine and we copy and paste some of the job descriptions over. Does that mean that that job description is the best description that could be had? No, not necessarily. And in many cases, it's probably a little bit too strict as well. So thinking about what those certifications are, what those minimums are, and are they absolutely necessary? Now, I've had some great candidates who have some awesome certifications, and I've had some great candidates who come in with that great mindset as well. And the latter is what I really want to make sure, at least have the opportunity to evaluate when I have an open role within an organization. And then sometimes the focus areas are very, very large. We have a cybersecurity analyst who requires database experience, for example, but they also, according to that job role, they might require, well, information risk management experience. That's a huge subset of knowledge that somebody is going to have according to this job description to come into a role. I'm not saying that it's not required for every role, but it just makes us think, what are we truly trying to get at with some of the job descriptions that we are moving forward with as HR professionals, as cybersecurity professionals as well? What do we truly want to see coming into our organization? Well, if you could think about improving the job description just a little bit. One thing I really want to hone in on is that required skill versus nice to have. And I think back to what just occurred last week. So for those who are very familiar with the cybersecurity industry, many cybersecurity professionals were really racing to fix up an Exchange zero-day vulnerability. Those who aren't familiar with Exchange, it's essentially a mail server that many IT groups have within an organization to make sure your email flows back and forth without you even noticing it. Well, this 0 day, or a 0 day that allowed a bad actor to maybe exploit a vulnerability within an environment without anyone else knowing about it, well, it was found last week. And it was something that not only Microsoft, but also the government was really making sure that private and public organizations were working on and getting past. But why do I bring up this? Well, it's because Exchange, a lot of times, is not something that a cybersecurity analyst really gets their hands into very often. So I absolutely needed to learn a little bit more about some of the high level details and also the advanced details of Exchange in order to make sure I could talk intelligently about the vulnerability. And I bring that up because I wouldn't put on a job description that you absolutely need to have Exchange experience for a cybersecurity analyst role. But I do want on a job description someone that can, well, start digging into the weeds very quickly, somebody who can understand what the problems are. And then if they need to understand more of the technical, they absolutely can along the way. And I think the Exchange vulnerability that came out last week was a great reminder for everybody about that. And I also look at the application tracking system, the applicant tracking system. Many organizations absolutely utilize that. And of course, it's a great benefit to many HR organizations. But that job description that I was talking about, well, if it's a little bit too stringent, how do we know if we're losing applicants that really could be incredibly successful at the role? So my recommendation is, well, when you're done with this webinar, look to see what that ATS system is actually tracking for many of those cyber roles. And you might find, wow, you're looking for that unicorn, someone who is 100% proficient in everything. You actually could probably do even better with someone who is a little bit less proficient in the technology, but at least has some of that experience that some of these automated job roles wouldn't be able to find along the way. And then lastly, I'll end with just make sure you look at those certifications. Are they truly part of that role? Is that something that you want to put that barrier on? Because no, from the other side, it is a huge barrier for many candidates, and it scares off a lot of people from being able to apply. But when they apply and we finally found our good candidate, we have to interview them, right? And we have to have that conversation with them. And there are a lot of great articles about the art of interviewing. But when it comes to cybersecurity, everyone has their own methodology when it comes to interviewing, right? And I am under the camp that while I absolutely make sure that somebody has, well, potentially depending on the role, the right technical skills or at least the right mindset, the soft skills end up being very, very critical to me. So I look at the communications and, I think back to the incidents. I think back to the SolarWinds incident that occurred not that long ago. One of the key points of contact for the SolarWinds incident, especially for many incident responders and many cybersecurity professionals, really was the communication. It was the communication out to the infrastructure teams. It was the communication out to the legal team or potentially other teams within your organization. It also required us in some circumstances to reach out to other organizations and to ask them what they were doing about the SolarWinds incident as well. And I bring this up because someone who doesn't have that really strong communication skill, well, they might have a really tough time during an incident like that, where they do have to respond and have those communication skills up high. Another thing that I absolutely love about cybersecurity is it allows folks to become a leader without being designated as a leader. I think back to that example I just talked about with SolarWinds. Well, if somebody's having a communication with those outside of the IT security organization, they are leading that communication, and they are true leaders by doing that. So being able to really find out who can lead an incident, who could lead things to the next step, and being able to tease that out a little bit during some interview questions really is a great way of finding out if your candidate has that potential to be successful in a role which you may have thought was very technical, which actually requires a lot of problem solving, it requires a lot of communication, it requires a lot of soft skills to be very, very successful in. And that technical can absolutely be taught along the way. I think back to my conversation way back when I knocked on the door over on the networking team at the college I was working at. I said, I'd like to sit with you. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what you're doing. And that allowed me to get some of the technical skills I didn't have access to along the way. And in future webinars as well, we're going to be talking about how many people can start getting some of that technical experience that really does scare them off from many of the cybersecurity roles, even if they don't have the experience at a corporation or at a job. What are some great ways of really focusing on the interview and making sure that you have a great cybersecurity candidate? Well, one thing I love focusing on is those problem-solving skills. And I like having that open-ended answer as well. I'd rather not be that individual who does that technical dissertation of, hey, what's A, B, and C? I need you to rattle off the answers to it. That person might be incredibly smart, but are they going to fit that cybersecurity role? Well, it depends, right? And it's something for us as cybersecurity managers and then also HR to think about as well. And then some of those folks who come from other IT areas end up being a very good candidate for a role within cybersecurity. So we just talked a lot about how some folks don't have that confidence that they are going to be able to be successful at a role because maybe they don't have some of those technical skills. Well, hold on, if we're in an organization, we've got a team all over the place in many circumstances that is working on IT related items. Sometimes they're a really good candidate within the organization. So thinking back to that job description, well, I was talking about how I wanted that candidate to have a database background, or at least know a little bit about databases, or potentially I wanted them to know much about networking. Well, we could absolutely just look around our own organization. There are incredible, smart superstars all over an organization. And many times they might not want to tell you, but they want to join the cybersecurity industry. And they want to join, but they don't know. And they think that the barriers are a little tough for them as well. And that always blows me away because they come in with such great experience, but then maybe they don't have the confidence to really apply for some of these cybersecurity roles. So as HR professionals, as cybersecurity professionals, it's up to us to start looking around an organization to figure out, well, there might be some really good candidates. Now, of course, let's talk to the manager first and make sure that we're not poaching somebody from internal in our organization. But it is really fun to look for candidates and to help them grow and develop within an organization as well. We don't have to worry about all that knowledge that has to be built up from a brand new candidate. There's some sample interview questions, and you're going to notice on some of these samples, and I'd love for you to take a photo of this and to utilize this for some of your interviews. It's really having that conversation, having a conversation with that person who is looking for that role of how do they think? What are some of their problem solving skills? And you're going to notice some key things, especially in the beginning of the question. For example, in italics, talk about an interaction with another team or an external party. And very quickly, you're going to be able to figure out those great communication skills that really sometimes are very hard to capture on a resume. Well, you'll be able to really tease that out during the interview. I'll tell you, there are some really great examples of people who have enormously wonderful communication skills that really could be translated into a wonderful cybersecurity role, and they could be successful in it as well. Talk about describing a scenario. And when they start describing that scenario, you'll be able to understand their thought process as well. And as they describe that scenario, they'll probably go into some of the other problems that they've had. And of course, a great tenet of interviewing, well, you had a problem, what was that solution to it? And you get to understand what their thought process was about the solution to a problem. It brings back an interview I had many moons ago, many moons ago, when I was interviewing somebody for a cybersecurity analyst role. And this particular person, while they didn't have all of the technical experience that I was, at least at the time, looking for, they did have some great incident management skills. And it was because they used to work as an EMS. And when they did that, they were able to, well, they worked very hard, not only under pressure and under pressurized circumstances, but they were able to make decisions very quickly. And I'll tell you, that person we ended up hiring was incredibly successful in the role, and their technical skills absolutely started going up after a little bit of time in the role. So something to think about when you start looking at candidates. Sometimes when it's on paper, it may be missing some of the technical skills, but then you look at some of the other experience, well, you actually might have a really good candidate. And then lastly on that as well, when I was interviewing myself for a role, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I had my job description with me, I had the resume with me, and the person who ended up being my boss started talking to me about what's a job back in high school and college. And I was perplexed as to why this individual was talking to me about that. Well, he wanted me to find out how I did under pressure because I used to work in retail when I was back in high school and college. And how do you do under pressure? How do you work with customers? How do you, when you have all of these eyes looking at you, how do you operate? And that's exactly what some of his questions were. We didn't get too much in the technical. It ended up being a really successful role, and I had a lot of fun with it. So again, new ways of thinking about how to interview people that are applying for cybersecurity roles. Now, we talked a lot about the interviews, but we also have leaders along the way as well. Well, some things I've done in my local area is I've started doing a lot of volunteering. And I started volunteering for some cybersecurity organizations, but I also did some experience in volunteering on non-cyber. So we're going to go into both. One thing I very much enjoyed about working in also volunteering with OWASP is I had that opportunity to learn a lot about application security. And I purposely picked out OWASP because I don't touch application security all that often in my role. I don't touch the developer requirements, and I really don't get into application security all too often. But I knew I wanted to learn much more about it. So going into one of those groups, which is now online as well, obviously with COVID-19, allows you to, a candidate or someone who is interested in a role, to really start understanding a little bit more about some of the security initiatives in other areas of IT. But I bring this up because someone who goes to a volunteer organization is volunteering. By nature, they're trying to better themselves along the way. And that's what I love about looking at candidates who have done some things with whether it be OWASP or even with SANS as well. SANS has a great alumni group. They also have the GIAC advisory board as well. And that's something that brings the cybersecurity group and also the people that are aligned to it together to really better themselves along the way. And I talked about the leadership in other organizations as well. Well, in my hometown, I've been able to be a volunteer lead for a nonprofit. And what better way to get leadership experience than to get that experience while it does not sign your paycheck? And it's amazing for those who are leaders on the call right now, all of the different, very interesting concerns that are brought up to your attention as a leader, no matter what role that you're in. And getting that experience and also showcasing to a future employer that you actually can lead and you have that experience behind it is incredibly powerful. And I bring both of those up because, well, I didn't have leadership experience at the time when I started looking at this volunteer organization, and I didn't have application security experience when I was really focusing in on OWASP. And I was able to not only showcase, but then also develop a little bit of knowledge, almost like hands-on knowledge too, of being able to really fortify the resume a little bit. So if you find somebody who does have that experience, I'll tell you, they'll be able to learn very, very quickly within your organization. Well, maybe they also tried their hands at public speaking. I'm part of a Toastmasters group, and I loved being part of Toastmasters. Well, at Toastmasters, you get to really practice public speaking, but you also get to practice leading as well. And those who do volunteer, and again, keyword, volunteer their time in other areas outside of the working world, I'll tell you, when I see it on a resume, it is such a huge thing. And I almost always want to invite them in to have a conversation with them. And almost always, too, they end up being very, very good candidates for a role. Do they fit every single technical item that I have on the resume, on the job description? Not always, but they do fit the problem solving skills, the soft skills, those communication skills. And almost always they end up being incredibly successful at the role as well. Another thing to look for are people who have started making videos online, have really tried their hand at writing, whether it be through white papers or a blog, or have helped out in other webinars too. And again, looking at it from that problem-solving experience, being able to put yourself forward in a situation that might be a little bit nerve-wracking for them, especially as they're trying to start it out. Well, that's something that, in especially cybersecurity, is a really good quality to have because you have to put yourself in positions that you really don't know much about. I think back about Exchange a little bit. I wasn't an Exchange subject matter expert, but I needed to learn about it very, very quickly in order to become successful at being that incident handler, being that someone who's responding to it along the way. So thinking about not just the leadership perspective, but then also that technical perspective. So we talked a lot about how to find somebody who's got those soft skills, right? But we do want those hard skills. We want those technical skills. They're out there. And sometimes the applicants don't come up right off the bat because they're a little bit nervous that they haven't had any of that formal expertise. I will tell you 100%, those folks who play around and have a lab set up or have done something that's technical outside of working hours, they are really, really good candidates for a role. And I think back to someone that we just recently interviewed too, and where I currently am. And this individual was a very good fit for the role, but we ended the conversation with a really good story about how this individual was able to tinker with some very cool technologies at the house. And well, this individual learned a lot about technology just by trial and error. And he was trying to build up a little model airplane. And I thought it was great. And I really enjoyed not just the technical part of it, but then also, well, how outside of the working hours, he was able to gain some of that experience. And we're going to go into some other great examples of how one can get technical experience over future webinars. But some things I love finding out, well, maybe they have at least attempted, or if they've done very successful at capture the flag or CTF type activities. Maybe they've built a website. People have done a lot of great technical work, especially over the last decade, that they don't feel very much fits a role, but actually it does. We understand some of their technical acumen. So if they showcase that they've built a website or potentially are running a website, while that's not a full delineation over to cybersecurity and some of the technology that's needed, it certainly doesn't hurt, especially if you look at application security or web security. Another group of people I love hearing more from are those who are very active in forums online. So I think of maybe Microsoft's forums or some of the vendor forums or potentially even Quora, and they start answering questions along the way. Well, they're putting themselves out there. Sometimes they're going to know the answer, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they can linger a little bit and then also try looking at some of the answers on the form. But most of the time, they're doing this on their own time. And that really starts building in some of that great technical knowledge. And then lastly, loves breaking things apart. I talked a little bit about the person that I just interviewed. In other times when I've done some interviews, I was able to talk to someone who took a computer totally apart and then put it back together. Why is that so exciting? They were able to learn so much about the inner working of a computer, but then also showcase to me that they absolutely understand a lot of technical and they're interested in their technical acumen as well. And they end up being wonderful candidates. And I bring all this up because applicants sometimes don't want to put that on a resume, for example, for many different reasons. Or they don't feel this experience because it's outside of the working world is applicable to the experience that they would be able to bring to the table at an organization. And the short answer of that is it absolutely is. Sometimes it doesn't fit very neatly in a resume. It doesn't fit very neatly in an ATS system, but it absolutely fits wonderfully in an organization. And that's why those interview questions really trying to tease out what that great leader is, what the type of technical superstar they are, really can get to the bottom of who can really help out within your organization. Within your organization too, there are some very creative ways that I've moved forward with to increase that technical knowledge. And I think back to when I graduated college and I went into, it was an organization that was able to really have a bit of a rotation for many of the folks who just got out of college to, well, start learning about networking, start learning about the database team, and potentially nowadays learning about the cloud teams as well. But instituting a bit of a rotation period for candidates, especially entry-level candidates who are coming in, they might have the cybersecurity knowledge, but maybe they don't have some of that other underlying knowledge. And I think back to a Brian Krebs article that I read a few months back where there were about 5 or 6 technical skills that really were very hard to find within cybersecurity professionals. So there was Linux knowledge, there was networking knowledge, and there's even data architecture or data and cryptography knowledge that was missing as well. Well, one great way of really formalizing that for your team and for your organization is to allow them to expand their horizon, to sit next to, or maybe get onto a video call with somebody who is running an IT team, but not with a cybersecurity spin to it. And that allows them to really get some of the great technical knowledge and to be there when a problem occurs. Now, sometimes that's a little tough for an organization to do. So what I've also instituted is that Google 80-20 policy with a lot of my team. And we look at 80% of the time, we do things 100% well. I know that's not the right math, but we do things 100% well. And that 20% of the time, well, we end up doing something that really pushes our boundaries a little bit. And what I have advised, not just my current team, but everyone that I've managed as well, is I want them to really get out there, to go out to the networking teams, go out to an infrastructure team, or potentially, if the technology isn't as interesting to them, maybe the vendor team or maybe the legal team, and sit with them at times and sit with them in order to learn what some of their day-to-day is. How, as a cybersecurity professional, are we supposed to make sure that we are not only looking at the right things to protect an organization, but we can understand it as well? Well, sometimes just sitting next to that person. Now, another thing for the 80-20 rule that has really worked out well and has scared a lot of people off from roles too is those who don't know how to code. And when they learn how to code, well, they are all of a sudden able to unlock a lot of the expertise they had in their head. But sometimes they don't have a lot of time to learn how to code, right? So again, in that 20% of the time, I really advise people, especially in my team, to start learning a little bit about coding. They don't have to become coders tomorrow, but at least they'll be able to understand. And one particular circumstance, we were able to utilize someone who had no Python skills prior to this 80-20 split that I had with the team. Well, they were able to learn Python along the way. And they learned it just enough to really help us out with some of our triaging and to connect some of our products that we had in line together. And I was so excited about that because it's not something that you would put on, at least in myself, you would not put on the job description, number one. And it's also not something that you would put as the yearly review, but it really challenges that person too. And it makes them feel very welcomed within an organization, that they're able to really test out their skills, because not every organization's like that, right? And that's something like a stretch goal, like I had talked about. And then lastly, SANS has some really good items and recommendations for free that anybody, whether it's an HR individual, cybersecurity, or somebody who's trying to get into the cybersecurity industry, can look at. Cyberaces.org. We utilize SANS summits, and I've had the wonderful opportunity of speaking at some SANS summits over the last few years. We have webinars just like this one. Again, thank you for popping on. SANS webinars happen weekly. In fact, there's almost maybe 3 to 5 per week. I'm sure there's even more sometimes. Tech Tuesdays, and then white papers as well. And it's a really good way for whether it's that HR professional who wants to know just a little bit more about cybersecurity, or someone who's trying to get into the industry can really start getting their hands wet within the organization to learn a little bit more. So in conclusion, I want to really hone in on the fact that we have a big talent gap. I get that, but sometimes we have a talent gap because it might be due to us. It might be due to cybersecurity managers. It might be due to other folks that are looking at candidates that are looking in, but they can't exactly get into the organization. And it's such a great opportunity for HR and IT to work together in order to make sure that we absolutely can get the right candidates not only up and running, but also allow them to be successful at a role as well. And again, when you get off this webinar and you think back to what you have done in the past to start recruiting some of your cyber talent, well, we could think back to how do we make those job descriptions just a little bit softer, depending on the circumstance. Not every job description fits this, but job descriptions that allows the right candidates to come in, looking at those interview questions, and not having a great candidate get lost because the interview questions may have gone way too deep or way too technical. We want to bring them into the organization. We can look at looking at that fostering growth internally. I talked a little bit about the IT folks. I talked about doing a rotation, having somebody in a very informal setting, being able to learn on the job. And also within your own team too, especially as managers, we have that opportunity, or as leaders, you have that opportunity to make sure growth is a top focus for everybody on the team. Not just do we want it to be a top focus, and it's good for the individual who's in the role, but then also it allows our cybersecurity group to be successful, because as we're all very well aware, there are a lot of evolving, not only threats, but technologies that many of us have to be attuned to and at least understand. And then thinking about where that great talent is. How do we pull that in? Well, we could do it so we could bring down those barriers to allow people to apply for a role that maybe they don't feel they're 100% qualified for, but after editing the job description, doing the interview, and then also having that conversation with them to grow within an organization, we absolutely have that opportunity to make them successful. And I want to leave you with this. Open that door. Many want to come into our field, but just don't really know how to. It's on us to open up that door for them. Now, we're going to talk about this for a few different webinars as well, and I invite everybody to come on in to go into Skilling the Gap in that webinar series. We're going to talk about knowing our applicants, how to better assess our applicants. Well, what if you don't have that knowledge of cybersecurity or any of that expertise in cybersecurity? No problem, and I hope that you leave the webinar knowing that, but we're going to delve into that in an even deeper webinar on May 13th. We get talent into an organization, but then many times that talent goes away. Cybersecurity is a very, very tough field to keep talent in right now. So I'm going to work in some opportunity for everybody to start thinking about how we can get talent to stay within our organization, because all those things that I talked about many of times, well, it absolutely requires us to make sure that we have a bit of an investment in that person, and they have an investment in us as well. And then lastly in the series, we're going to talk about some creative ways to really land that dream cybersecurity role for those who are either looking into the cybersecurity industry or those maybe who want to grow within the cybersecurity industry. And thank you very, very much for your time. I very much appreciate the time and you spending time talking about this. I know it's a lot of fun to figure out creative ways to get folks into our cybersecurity world, but I'm very confident, not only with the help of the IT security professionals out there, but then also other groups such as HR too, we're going to be able to help bridge this gap one applicant at a time. Thank you, Laura.
Wonderful. Kevin, thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. So the first one, too often companies offer continuing education and professional training through SANS, etc., as a benefit of working for them. But when you arrive, there is never any budget or desire to spend unless a major new technology is deployed. It feels almost dishonest. How do you keep talent motivated and engaged, and to continuously learn hands-on techniques when there is little budget and little support or direction?
Love the question, and I've been going through this for the last few years as well. So obviously there are some training budgets that are being cut, and they're always being cut. Even if a company does well, training budget tends to get cut every once in a while, right? But what's been really nice is that I've been able to utilize, and again, just thinking creatively of how to get people that hands-on access and hands-on training. Vendors do offer a fair amount of training. In many of the organizations that I have been in, there were times when we brought a vendor in, and unbeknownst to me, we paid for training. I had no idea. And then I started talking to the technical account manager, and I would ask, hey, what are your training options? And then all of a sudden I would hear that we paid for 50 hours worth of training, and I had no idea. So we ended up utilizing a lot of that training for some really cool technologies. And I think back to some of the EDR technologies that we had, or some of the more technical ones. And it's been a lot of fun to utilize the vendor for that. So that's one creative way. Another creative way, and again, also on the vendor sphere as well, I talked about CTFs, or capture the flag. Many of the vendors were aligned to SIM type solutions, or the security event manager type of solutions. Sometimes they offer CTFs, and many times they're free. And you're able to bring your entire team together. And in fact, I went through this with Splunk. In fact, Splunk had a boss. It's called BOTS, Boss of the SOC Challenge. And it was wonderful because it was just a bunch of great people in a room together, again, prior to COVID-19, where we were able to log into a Splunk instance. We were able to get logs out of a dummy Splunk instance, and we had to do a capture the flag. And it was about 5 hours worth of work. I learned so much about Splunk and also the log sources. They were AWS log sources coming in just in that CTF alone than I did even when I was trying to ingest the AWS log sources into our security event manager. And I was blown away by it. So that's another creative way of looking at it as well. One thing that's, last thing as well, I think it's been good to have people log on to Udemy, to other a little bit less financial or less expensive tool sets that offer some great technology and also some great learning as well. And in fact, some folks on my prior team, I think it was like $10 or maybe $100 in order for them to purchase a video series on Udemy for a very particular technology, right? So it was a little bit more technology based, but it was allowing them to at least get their hands dirty on the technology and learn about it as well. But going back to the first one, ask your vendor. You'd be totally surprised at how many vendors offer training. Sometimes it's a cost, don't get me wrong, but then other times it's a cost that could have already been paid for, or it could even be free training. So it's certainly an avenue to go down, especially on the technical side.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Really quickly, someone noticed that the date on the third webcast that's showing on the slides right now also says May 13th, but it is not. It is June 3rd.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for that catch. The next question we have, I have an open position for a cybersecurity product engineer. Most applicants so far have experience with IT or network related security and little to no familiarity with embedded software security that we are looking for. At this point, I'm not sure if there are many people with this background and may start looking for an embedded software engineer who would work in cyber. What are your thoughts?
I love the latter part of that statement, is that we would be looking at, and potentially it's internal within that one organization as well, but really looking from within. It truly is amazing, and I'm blown away every single time at how much talent and great talent there is within an organization already that many times we totally overlook. And I don't think we do it maliciously, we just tend to overlook it as well. So if there is a job description that really does fit some of the expertise within the industry that you're currently in, or the company that you're in, really not only posting it on a job board, but then also reaching out to managers as well and seeing if they might be able to recommend somebody. Because again, I think back to the applicant, and if it's an internal applicant, sometimes they want the mobility, but then other times they might feel a little bit guilty about the mobility. So they might get along very well with their manager, which is a great thing, right? But they don't want to leave their manager, or they don't want to make it seem like they want to leave the team. And having that open dialogue, especially with the managers and of course with the applicant as well, could really help out. But it sounds like, especially on that latter side, there could absolutely be some potential internally to make that role. And then thinking about how do you teach some of those problem solving skills or cybersecurity skills, you'd be able to do that, especially if there's already a group there as well. They'll be able to adapt hopefully pretty quickly as well.
Wonderful. The next question. How do you recover mentally from brutal technical interviews? where you're interviewing for a relatively junior position, but the interviewer is out to make you look silly by asking questions about kernel exploitation or reverse engineering?
That's a funny question. I went through an interview many years ago where I was in the exact same position, and I left the interview I'm looking around like, did anyone else, was anyone else in that interview? Did they see how badly I did in that interview? And what I found out was they knew very much well that I did not have the answers to those questions, but they wanted to see how I would react under pressure. And I ended up getting an offer for that job. And some of the feedback that they had given for that job was, we understood that you didn't know some of what we were asking, but what can you do to make sure that you know about it? And that's one thing that I look for as well. Yeah, and I'll never forget, it was one interview question that I had from my first boss. And he had asked me, hey, what do you do if you don't know the answer to a question? And, at the time I was just out of college and I said, oh, I go to the library or I go online and I try to figure out what the answer is. Well, the simple answer was, I just ask for help. If I can't figure it out within 5 or 10 minutes, I would ask for help. And that's exactly what I also look for as well. We understand that people are not going to know every last thing. It's a niche industry with very niche industries and sectors on top of that industry as well. So we know that. Now, it really all depends what that interviewer was truly after. Were they really trying to figure out the technical skills? Well, then if that's the case, then let's make sure that that job description really falls into place with who we're bringing in. That's number one. Number two, they may be trying to figure out how you do under pressure as well. And that was something that I don't use that tactic, but it is something that I have seen, especially in the industry. And I think back to why they do it, partly because if you're doing an incident, you're working on incident response, and I go back to that EMS example, a lot of times we're doing it under pressure, right? And we might not know what the actual answer is. So I would walk out of that interview with your head up high, know that you went through a very stringent interview, but you also learned a lot about how some interviews truly go. And there's a really great art to changing around those answers as well, especially if you don't know. I'm certainly not expecting, I don't think anybody within the industry is expecting everyone to know every last thing about cyber, and especially if it doesn't align to the role. And I hope that really all works out for the individual to ask the question.
Terrific. And the final question we have, how do we sell the idea of training and not just certified candidates?
So if we're looking at training, I think we want to make sure, so I'm going to answer it from the hat of a cybersecurity manager, a cybersecurity leader. We want to make sure that we're successful in our charter as well. And if I have a lot of folks that are part of an organization that don't know any of our technology, don't know how it relates to a control, don't know how it relates to reducing risk within the organization, why are they there, right? And it's also going to make us be very unsuccessful along the way. Now, I'll go into a little bit more of a particular example, especially with cloud right now. I'm noticing very quickly that there's on-prem experience from those older technologies, and I've talked about Exchange a little bit, and things are changing. And now we're talking about AWS and Azure, Google Cloud, and other cloud providers as well. And thinking about, hey, if I'm going to, and the strategy of the company is to bring more items to the cloud or utilize the cloud, we need to understand what's going on. And again, as managers, it's really up to us to showcase the fact that we have a bit of a skill gap. And there's another webinar that hopefully I'll be able to really touch upon this a little bit. And it's that NICE framework. It's a framework that allows us to truly understand where some of the skill gaps are within an organization. And it's certainly not just on the entry level, it's also on the experienced level as well. And it's certainly not their fault either. And it's up to us as HR professionals, as cybersecurity managers, to identify it, really showcase what happens if we don't know what this knowledge is. And I think back to cloud, we don't know how to operate the cloud, we don't know how to secure the cloud, we're not going to be very successful. And what happens when we're trying to really secure something that we don't know much about? It's going to end pretty badly. And I think back to that quote in the very, very beginning about how an untrained workforce really has been a risk and a huge risk to organizations. And that's a very good example of that. So there's a little bit of selling that can go into it, especially if the dollar or the price tag is high. But again, think creatively. There might be other ways around it that aren't as much of a higher price tag, but can still get the folks trained up as well. CTFs is a great example of that.
Great. And those are all the questions that we had, Kevin. So I want to thank you all for coming. I would ask for anyone who has 45 seconds to spare to please fill out the short little eval that we have. I put the link in the chat. We are really working on developing this topic and providing more content, and we want to provide that in a way that is helpful for you. So your feedback is greatly appreciated. Kevin, thank you for your expertise, and we look forward to having you again with us next month on Thursday, April 8th, knowing your applicants, how to stay current to best assess your cyber applicants.
Thank you very much, Flora. Thanks for the time, everybody, today. I really appreciate it.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.